There is a particular kind of exhaustion that does not come from labor, nor from responsibility, nor even from adversity. It comes from resistance, from quietly, endlessly opposing the way the world actually is. Most people experience this without ever naming it. They wake already braced. They move through their days with an undercurrent of tension, as though life were something to be negotiated with, argued against, or subtly resented. The Stoics observed this condition long before it became fashionable to medicalize it. They did not call it anxiety. They called it error, an error of judgment. They understood that human suffering is rarely produced by events themselves. It is produced by the conclusions we draw about those events, often hastily, emotionally, and without examination. This insight is not dramatic. It is devastatingly precise. More than 2 millennia ago, in a world of political instability, fragile health, and abrupt reversals of fortune, Stoic philosophers reached an unsettling conclusion. Most people are distressed not because life is cruel, but because they expect it not to be. Stoicism begins, therefore, not with comfort, but with clarity. Epictetus, who knew both enslavement and intellectual freedom, opened his teachings with a distinction so stark it leaves no room for sentimentality. Some things are within our power, others are not. This division is the foundation of mental composure. Your judgments, intentions, and actions belong to you. Reputation, weather, chance, the behavior of others, these do not. And yet, most people live as though the opposite were true. They invest their emotional life in matters they cannot command and neglect the one domain where genuine authority is possible: the self. The Stoics regarded this as a form of inner disorder. Marcus Aurelius, who bore responsibilities few modern minds can imagine, reminded himself relentlessly that disturbance arises not from circumstance, but from interpretation. You have power over your mind, not over events. Understand this, and you will discover resilience. This is not the resilience of defiance, but of alignment. When you cease demanding that reality conform to preference, something remarkable occurs. Mental friction dissolves, energy returns, attention sharpens. Life does not become gentle, but it becomes workable. This principle alone, if genuinely absorbed, alters the entire texture of one's days. Consider how much time is spent in quiet irritation, delays, misunderstandings, minor discourtesies, each granted disproportionate importance. The Stoic sees these not as provocations, but as irrelevancies. Not everything deserves a response. Not everything merits concern. Discernment, rather than suppression, is the goal. From this clarity emerges the second great Stoic realization. Adversity is not the enemy of a meaningful life. It is the material from which it is formed. Marcus Aurelius expressed this with characteristic restraint when he wrote that the obstacle to action advances action, that what stands in the way becomes the way. This is not motivational rhetoric. It is philosophical realism. Difficulty reveals structure. Without resistance, character remains theoretical. The Stoics did not romanticize hardship, but neither did they flee from it. They understood that ease breeds fragility, while measured difficulty cultivates strength. In an age that equates comfort with success, this insight feels almost subversive. The Stoic does not ask, "Why has this happened to me?" He asks, "What does this require of me?" This shift changes everything. Rejection becomes instruction. Delay becomes training in patience. Conflict becomes a test of restraint. One does not emerge from such experiences untouched, but one does emerge refined. Seneca warned that a life without challenge produces a temperament incapable of bearing reality when it inevitably asserts itself. Preparedness, to the Stoic, was not pessimism, it was respect for life's unpredictability. This respect extends to time itself. Few ideas were as central to Stoic thought as the proper use of the present moment. Not in the modern sense of mindfulness as escapism, but as attentiveness to duty. Marcus Aurelius advised himself not to linger in memory nor to dwell in anticipation, but to concentrate the mind fully upon the task at hand. This was not a call to ignorance of the future, but to refusal of distraction. The present, the Stoics believed, is the only arena in which virtue can be practiced. To neglect it is to forfeit agency. Much of modern disquiet stems from temporal dislocation, minds perpetually elsewhere, anxiously rehearsing futures that may never arrive, or relitigating pasts that cannot be altered. The Stoic response is austere but effective. Attend to what is before you, execute it well, release the rest. Such discipline does not diminish ambition, it purifies it. Ambition ungoverned becomes restlessness. Ambition guided by reason becomes purpose. This requires self-command. Self-command, for the Stoics, was not severity, but coherence, the capacity to act according to principle rather than impulse. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that mastery of the self is the only dominion worth seeking, for all others are temporary and often illusory. This mastery is not achieved through denial of desire, but through its education. Desire, left unchecked, becomes dependency. Dependency erodes freedom. The Stoic seeks not to extinguish desire, but to align it with what is genuinely good. This is why they placed such emphasis on discipline, not as punishment, but as liberation. A disciplined mind is not constrained, it is unburdened. This discipline extends into the emotional life. Contrary to popular caricature, the Stoics did not advocate emotional coldness. They advocated emotional literacy. They recognized that emotions arise spontaneously, but obedience to them is optional. Between stimulus and response lies judgment. Examine the judgment, and the emotion loses its tyranny. Anger, fear, envy, these are not sins. They are signals, indicators of beliefs that deserve scrutiny. By learning to pause, the Stoic creates space for reason to reassert itself. This space is the birthplace of dignity. And dignity, to the Stoics, was inseparable from the awareness of mortality. Memento mori. Remember that you will die. Not as a threat, but as a clarifying truth. When one remembers the finitude of life, trivial concerns lose their urgency. Vanity fades. Procrastination becomes irrational. Marcus Aurelius wrote as though each day might be his last, not to darken his thoughts, but to refine them. What is worth my attention now? What is worthy of my character? This awareness does not impoverish life, it intensifies it. Gratitude deepens, presence sharpens, choice becomes deliberate. And so, Stoicism does not offer escape from reality. It offers intimacy with it, a way of standing firmly within the world, neither seduced by illusion nor crushed by difficulty. This is only the beginning. The remaining principles will carry this structure further into resilience, excellence, responsibility, and the quiet authority that emerges when one learns to live without internal contradiction. The Stoics held a view that many find unsettling. A life free of difficulty is not a fortunate one. it is an untrained one. They observed that human beings do not become measured, temperate, or wise by accident. These qualities are cultivated, often slowly, often through discomfort. Character, in their view, is not revealed in moments of ease, but in moments of pressure. This is why Stoicism places such careful emphasis on emotional resilience. Resilience is not the absence of feeling, it is the refusal to be governed by feeling. Seneca warned that the unexamined emotion gains authority it does not deserve. Once emotion begins to dictate action, reason retreats, and with it, dignity. The Stoic does not attempt to silence emotion, he interrogates it. Why has this feeling arisen? What belief sustains it? Is that belief accurate? Such questioning is not repression, it is intellectual hygiene. Without it, emotions accumulate, distort perception, and eventually harden into temperament. The Stoics believed that temperament, once fixed, becomes destiny. This is why they insisted upon regular self-examination. Seneca recommended an evening review, not for self-condemnation, but for calibration. Where did I act in accordance with reason? Where did impulse overrule judgment? What correction is required tomorrow? This practice does not produce guilt. It produces clarity. Clarity is the foundation of self-respect. A person who understands their own patterns is no longer surprised by themselves. They become deliberate rather than reactive. This deliberateness extends into how one relates to others. The Stoics recognized a fundamental truth about human interaction. Most disappointments are born of expectation rather than malice. We assume others share our values. We assume consistency where none was promised. We interpret behavior personally when it is often circumstantial. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that people act according to what appears good to them, even when their judgment is flawed. This insight does not excuse injustice, it prevents bitterness. The Stoic corrects where correction is required, withdraws where withdrawal is necessary, and accepts where acceptance preserves peace. This capacity, to remain firm without becoming harsh, is rare. It is the mark of inner order. Inner order is what allows one to withstand insult without humiliation, disagreement without hostility, and loss without collapse. The Stoics were acutely aware that life offers no guarantees. Health deteriorates, fortune reverses, relationships end. They did not regard this as tragedy, but as condition. To live well is not to eliminate risk, but to be prepared for it. Preparedness begins with a sober understanding of impermanence. Everything external is temporary. This is not pessimism. It is accuracy. Once this is accepted, attachment loosens its grip. You enjoy what is present without demanding its permanence. You value without clinging. This attitude transforms gratitude. Gratitude to the Stoics was not a sentimental exercise. It was an act of realism. Marcus Aurelius advised beginning each day by recognizing the privilege of consciousness itself, the ability to think, to reason, to choose. When you understand how little is required for a life of dignity, excess loses its appeal. Contentment becomes possible. This contentment is not complacency. It is freedom from compulsion. The Stoic still strives, but he strives without desperation. Desperation, they believed, is evidence of misplaced value. If your peace depends upon outcomes beyond your control, peace will remain elusive. Thus, the Stoic relocates his sense of success. Success becomes fidelity to principle. Effort, not result, becomes the measure. This shift produces a remarkable effect. Fear diminishes. Fear thrives where identity is fragile. When self-worth is anchored internally, external threats lose their capacity to destabilize. This is why Stoicism has endured through centuries of upheaval. It produces individuals who remain coherent under pressure. Coherence is the quiet virtue modern life lacks. In a world saturated with noise, reaction, and spectacle, the Stoic remains measured. He speaks when speech is necessary. He withholds when silence is wiser. This restraint is not passivity. It is precision. Precision of thought, precision of action. The Stoics believed that time is the most precious of resources, precisely because it cannot be reclaimed. Seneca wrote that life is not short, it is squandered. Most people, he observed, protect their property fiercely while giving away their time indiscriminately. The Stoic resists this. He understands that attention is life's currency. Where attention goes, life follows. Thus, he guards his attention carefully, not from duty, but from triviality. This discipline of attention restores depth. Work becomes craft rather than obligation. Conversation becomes presence rather than performance. Rest becomes restoration rather than escape. The Stoics did not seek intensity. They sought sufficiency. Enough effort, enough clarity, enough courage. Excess in any form was regarded as imbalance. Balance, however, was not static. It required constant adjustment. This is why Stoicism is not a system one masters once. It is a practice, a continual return to first principles. What is within my control? What is required of me now? What response preserves my character? These questions, asked sincerely, prevent drift. They anchor action in reason. And reason, for the Stoics, was not detached intellect. It was the highest expression of human nature. To live rationally was to live well, not because life becomes easier, but because it becomes intelligible. In the next part, we will explore how this internal order expresses itself in excellence, responsibility, courage, and the quiet authority that emerges when a person no longer lives at odds with themselves. The Stoics believed that the highest form of refinement is not intellect, but responsibility. Knowledge, in their view, becomes dangerous when it is divorced from conduct. A person may speak eloquently of virtue and yet live chaotically. Such a person, the Stoics warned, has not understood philosophy at all. Philosophy was not meant to be admired. It was meant to govern behavior. This conviction shaped how the Stoics understood excellence. Excellence was not superiority over others. It was fidelity to one's role. Each person, Marcus Aurelius believed, occupies a position within a larger whole. One may not choose the circumstances of that position, but one may choose how honorably it is fulfilled. This sense of duty is profoundly misunderstood in modern life. Duty is often associated with oppression, obligation, or loss of freedom. The Stoics understood it differently. Duty was alignment. To act in accordance with reason, nature, and social responsibility was not a burden. It was the highest expression of freedom. Freedom, to the Stoic, did not mean the absence of constraint. It meant the absence of internal contradiction. When your values, actions, and judgments are coherent, you experience a form of peace no external permission can grant. This coherence gives rise to quiet authority, not authority imposed through force, authority that emerges naturally from consistency. People trust those whose actions are predictable in the best sense, grounded, measured, principled. The Stoics were keen observers of power. Many of them lived close to it, and some, like Marcus Aurelius, bore it directly. They understood that power magnifies character. It does not create it. Without discipline, power corrupts quickly. With discipline, power becomes stewardship. This is why Stoicism insists upon humility. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that he was not superior to others, merely entrusted with responsibility. This humility protects against arrogance, the most corrosive of vices. Arrogance blinds, humility clarifies. A humble mind remains teachable, an arrogant one stagnates. The Stoic does not confuse confidence with entitlement. Confidence arises from preparation and self-command. Entitlement arises from expectation without effort. The former stabilizes, the latter destabilizes. This distinction becomes especially important in the face of success. Success, the Stoics warned, is a more subtle test than failure. Failure invites reflection. Success invites complacency. Thus, the Stoic treats success cautiously. He enjoys it without identifying with it. He uses it without becoming dependent upon it. This detachment preserves balance. Balance allows courage to function properly. Courage to the Stoics was not bravado. It was reasoned resolve in the presence of fear. Fear, they observed, is inevitable. Cowardice is optional. One may feel apprehension and still act honorably. One may feel uncertainty and still proceed with integrity. The Stoic does not wait for fear to disappear. He acts in spite of it. This capacity is strengthened by constant awareness of mortality. Memento mori was not a fixation on death, but a discipline of perspective. When one remembers that life is finite, trivial anxieties shrink. Petty ambition loses its charm. Vanity becomes absurd. What remains is seriousness. Not heaviness, but significance. What is worthy of a limited life? This question, asked sincerely, reshapes priorities. The Stoics did not measure a life by duration, but by quality of character. A short life lived with dignity was preferable to a long life spent in distraction. This view does not diminish grief. It contextualizes it. Loss is painful, but not meaningless. Pain, when met with reason, becomes depth. The Stoics never claimed wisdom eliminates suffering. They claimed it prevents suffering from becoming chaos. Chaos arises when emotion lacks structure. Structure arises from principle. This is why Stoicism places such emphasis on daily practice, not grand gestures, small, consistent acts of alignment, choosing restraint over impulse, choosing honesty over convenience, choosing patience over retaliation. These choices are rarely dramatic. They are, however, decisive. Over time, they shape a temperament that remains steady amid fluctuation. This steadiness is not indifference. The Stoics cared deeply about justice, about community, about the cultivation of virtue. They rejected withdrawal from life. Engagement, however, had to be governed by reason. One participates fully without becoming consumed. This balance is the hallmark of the Stoic life. It allows one to contribute meaningfully without losing oneself. This is particularly relevant in a world that constantly demands attention, reaction, and emotional investment. The Stoic chooses selectively. Not every outrage deserves response. Not every opinion merits engagement. Silence, when chosen deliberately, becomes strength. Speech, when measured, becomes effective. This discretion creates space for reflection. Reflection creates wisdom. And wisdom, in the Stoic sense, is not cleverness. It is the capacity to live without internal conflict. A person at peace with themselves becomes difficult to manipulate. Fear loses its leverage. Praise loses its intoxication. What remains is clarity. In the final part, we will draw these threads together, not into a conclusion, but into an invitation to practice, to reflect, and to carry forward a way of being that values depth over display, coherence over chaos, and dignity over noise. There comes a point in every serious life when accumulation ceases to satisfy. Not accumulation of possessions, nor of achievements, nor even of knowledge. One reaches a moment, often quietly, when the question changes. Not, what can I obtain, but how ought I to live? The Stoics understood this transition well. They regarded it as the threshold between distraction and maturity. A life devoted solely to acquisition remains restless. There is always more to secure, more to defend, more to fear losing. A life devoted to character, however, begins to stabilize. Not because uncertainty disappears, but because one no longer depends upon certainty for composure. This is the culmination of Stoic discipline. Not control over life, but composure within it. The Stoics did not imagine a world free of injustice, misfortune, or sorrow. They prepared themselves to meet these realities without surrendering integrity. This preparation is subtle. It does not announce itself. It does not seek validation. It reveals itself only under strain, when disappointment arrives and does not corrode dignity, when criticism is received without collapse or hostility, when success is met without arrogance. These moments reveal whether philosophy has remained theoretical or become embodied. The Stoics believed that wisdom must eventually descend from thought into temperament. A person's true philosophy is revealed not in what they claim to believe, but in how they respond when comfort is withdrawn. This is why Stoicism insists upon independence of mind, not isolation, independence, the capacity to stand internally without constant reinforcement from approval, agreement, or recognition. Such independence does not make one cold. It makes one reliable. Reliable in judgment, reliable in conduct, reliable under pressure. This reliability forms the foundation of trust, in relationships, in leadership, in oneself. When a person no longer contradicts themselves internally, their presence acquires weight, not dominance, gravity. Others sense it. Calm does not need to announce itself. This calm emerges naturally when one ceases to demand that life be different from what it is. Acceptance, in the Stoic sense, is not resignation. It is cooperation with reality. Reality does not yield to complaint. It responds only to competence. The Stoic becomes competent at the only task always available: governing the self. This governance is not harsh. It is measured. The Stoics rejected extremes. Excessive indulgence and excessive severity were equally suspect. Balance, they believed, was not mediocrity. It was mastery. Mastery of impulse, mastery of perspective, mastery of response. Such mastery frees attention for what truly matters: justice, contribution, clarity of mind. The Stoics believed humans are not solitary creatures. One does not perfect oneself in isolation. A well-governed inner life expresses itself outwardly in fairness, patience, and willingness to serve the whole. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that he was a part, not the center. This humility is not self-effacement, it is proportion. To understand one's place within something larger is to relieve oneself of unnecessary weight. You need not carry the world. You need only carry yourself honorably within it. This realization dissolves much modern anxiety. You stop attempting to control outcomes beyond your reach. You stop identifying your worth with results you cannot command. Instead, you ask simpler and more demanding questions. Did I act with integrity today? Did I speak truthfully where speech was required? Did I restrain myself where restraint preserved dignity? These questions are answerable. And because they are answerable, they restore agency. Agency is the antidote to helplessness. The Stoics were under no illusion that life would reward virtue consistently. They observed, without bitterness, that justice and reward often diverge. Virtue was not pursued for reward. It was pursued because it was right. This distinction is essential. When goodness depends upon recognition, it becomes fragile. When goodness is rooted in principle, it becomes resilient. This resilience produces a particular kind of satisfaction, quiet, stable, and enduring. Not happiness as stimulation, but contentment as order. Order within the mind, order within conduct. This order does not eliminate grief, but it prevents grief from dissolving structure. One may suffer and remain whole. This is perhaps the Stoics' most demanding promise. Not that life will spare you pain, but that pain need not dismantle you. And here, finally, we return to the beginning. Stoicism is not an escape from life. It is an agreement to meet life directly, without illusion, without exaggeration, without surrender of dignity. It asks for seriousness, but offers steadiness. It demands effort, but returns coherence. It does not flatter, it fortifies. If these reflections have held your attention, it is likely because they speak to something already present. A quiet recognition that depth matters, that restraint is strength, and that a well-governed inner life is not an antiquated ideal, but a necessity. This is not material to be consumed quickly. It is material to be lived with. If you find value here, remain, not out of habit, but out of alignment. Continued attention supports the continuation of thoughtful, unhurried inquiry in a world increasingly impatient with it. If you believe conversations like this deserve space, a measured gesture of support quietly signals that seriousness still has an audience. And if there is someone in your life with whom such reflections would not feel trivial, someone capable of discussing ideas rather than reacting to them, consider sharing this with them. Not to persuade, but to think together. Finally, if you are inclined, leave a considered remark, not applause, a thought. The Stoics valued dialogue over display, and dialogue, even centuries later, remains the most civil way minds refine one another. Thank you for your attention. Remember, you cannot govern events. You can govern yourself. And in that governance lies a freedom no circumstance can remove.